Before he became the face of the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history, Timothy McVeigh was known for something very different. Born in Pendleton, New York, he grew up fascinated by firearms, military history, and the idea of serving his country. Friends described him as quiet, intelligent, and intensely independent. In 1988, at the age of 20, McVeigh enlisted in the United States Army. He quickly earned a reputation as a disciplined and capable soldier. During Operation Desert Storm, he served with distinction, receiving commendations for his performance. For a time, his future appeared clear. He dreamed of joining the U.S. Army Special Forces, a career built on discipline, purpose, and service. But that future never came. After leaving the Army, McVeigh returned to civilian life, carrying experiences that would shape the years ahead. Like many veterans, he struggled to find direction outside the military. The uniform was gone, the mission was over, and the country he returned to was changing in ways he could neither understand nor accept. While Timothy McVeigh was searching for a new purpose, America itself was entering one of the most turbulent periods in its modern history. Across the country, political talk shows, newspapers, and gun shows became gathering places for people who believed Washington had grown too powerful. Then came two events that would leave a lasting mark on anti-government movements. In 1992, the deadly confrontation at Ruby Ridge raised difficult questions about the use of federal force. Less than a year later, the siege at Waco ended with a fire that claimed dozens of lives, including children. Images from the final day were broadcast across the country and became a defining moment for many who already distrusted the government. For most Americans, these events were tragic news stories. For Timothy McVeigh, they became deeply personal. He began to see them not as isolated incidents, but as evidence of a government he believed had turned against its own citizens. As the months passed, Timothy McVeigh's frustration deepened. Friends and acquaintances would later describe conversations in which he expressed growing anger toward the federal government. He attended gun shows across the country, where political literature circulated alongside firearms and military memorabilia. Among the writings associated with his developing worldview was the Turner Diaries, a fictional novel depicting a violent uprising against the United States government. Within extremist circles, the book had gained influence far beyond its status as fiction. McVeigh also strengthened his relationship with Terry Nichols, a fellow Army veteran who shared many of his grievances. Together, they spent long hours discussing politics, government authority, and what they believed the future of the country might hold. For most people, anger remains exactly that, anger. But for McVeigh, each conversation, each headline, and each perceived injustice seemed to reinforce a single conclusion. He no longer believed change could come through elections, public debate, or the courts. Increasingly, he came to believe that only violence could send the message he wanted America to hear. Every act of violence begins long before the first victim. It begins the moment someone decides that an idea is worth more than a human life. By late 1994, Timothy McVeigh's anger had hardened into conviction. What had once been political frustration was becoming something far more dangerous. Investigators would later conclude that he was no longer asking whether violence was justified. He had begun asking a different question. If violence was necessary, where should it happen? McVeigh reconnected with Terry Nichols, a man he trusted from his Army days. Together, they spent time discussing plans, traveling, and making decisions that prosecutors would later describe as steps toward carrying out the attack. None of these moments, viewed alone, appeared extraordinary. A road trip, a motel stay, a conversation, a rental inquiry. But history is often built from ordinary moments linked together by extraordinary intent. Looking back, investigators would see a pattern emerging. At the time, almost no one else did. The next question was no longer whether an attack would happen. It was where. As investigators reconstructed McVeigh's movements, they concluded that he had carefully selected the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. To McVeigh, the building represented the authority he believed had overstepped its limits, a visible symbol of the federal government he had come to oppose. But symbols can hide reality. Behind its concrete walls were offices filled with public servants carrying out routine work. Families arrived each morning. Visitors passed through its doors. On the second floor, a daycare center cared for young children while their parents worked. The people inside were not making national policy. They were accountants, receptionists, investigators, clerks' parents, children. In McVeigh's mind, he was choosing a target. In reality, he was choosing victims. Once the target had been chosen, there was only one thing left to decide. When, on April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh began the final stage of a plan that investigators would later reconstruct piece by piece. Driving a rented Ryder truck toward downtown Oklahoma City, he followed a route that had been planned in advance. At approximately 9:02 that morning, Timothy McVeigh parked the Ryder truck directly outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. He stepped away and continued on foot. Moments later, the silence of downtown Oklahoma City was broken. In an instant, the front of the building absorbed an immense blast. Windows shattered across surrounding blocks. Floors collapsed. Concrete columns failed. Within seconds, one of the busiest federal buildings in Oklahoma had become a disaster zone. 168 people lost their lives. Hundreds more were injured. Families across the country would spend the coming hours searching desperately for answers. Within minutes, the largest criminal investigation in American history to that point had already begun. As the explosion echoed across downtown Oklahoma City, thousands of people rushed toward the devastation. Timothy McVeigh moved in the opposite direction. Investigators later reconstructed how he calmly left the area on foot, blending into the confusion created by the attack. In those first moments, no one knew who had carried out the bombing. There were no photographs, no suspect descriptions, only smoke, dust, and questions. For a brief time, it appeared that the man responsible had disappeared. But less than 90 minutes later, everything changed. Just 90 minutes after the bombing, Oklahoma Highway Patrol Trooper Charlie Hanger noticed a yellow Mercury Marquis traveling without a license plate. It was the kind of traffic violation handled every day. Hanger activated his emergency lights. The driver pulled over without resistance. During the stop, the trooper discovered that the driver was carrying a concealed handgun without the required permit. Timothy McVeigh was arrested and taken to the Noble County Jail. Neither McVeigh nor the arresting officer knew that one of the largest criminal investigations in American history was already underway. As rescue crews searched the ruins of the Murrah Building, the man responsible was sitting alone in a jail cell, held on an unrelated state firearms charge. The bombing investigation and Timothy McVeigh's arrest had begun as two completely separate stories. They were about to become one. Investigators soon recovered a heavily damaged rear axle assembly from the wreckage, battered by the blast, but still carrying a manufacturer's identification number. That number led them through manufacturing records to a Ryder rental agency in Junction City, Kansas. Their employees identified the customer who had rented the truck days earlier, a former soldier, using the name Timothy McVeigh. A damaged piece of steel had become a name, a face, and a growing list of places he'd recently been. The race was no longer to identify the bomber. It was to find him before he disappeared. And, as it turned out, before a routine state charge let him walk free. While federal agents raced across multiple states connecting the evidence, McVeigh sat only hours away from the possibility of release on the Noble County firearms charge. Every phone call, every record, every minute mattered. Then came the discovery that closed the loop. Timothy McVeigh was not hiding. He was not fleeing the country. He was already sitting in the Noble County Jail, arrested less than 90 minutes after the bombing during what had begun as a routine traffic stop. The search was over. The harder task was understanding why it had happened. In the months that followed, investigators uncovered the beliefs that had driven Timothy McVeigh toward violence. He viewed the federal government not as an institution that could be challenged through law or public debate, but as an enemy that had to be confronted by force. Timothy McVeigh went to trial in 1997. The government's case was simple: one man, radicalized by rage at his own government, built and delivered a bomb with the help of one accomplice, Terry Nichols, who never set foot in Oklahoma City that day. McVeigh was convicted and sentenced to death. Nichols received life in prison, where he remains today. On June 11, 2001, Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. If you found this video informative, please subscribe to support the work.